This government meeting is brought to you by Eastworks and our local cable subscribers.
We're going to open up this meeting, and I want to welcome Dr. Erica Faginski-Stark. This is our second interview, and I'd like to welcome you to Easthampton and also ask that we open the meeting by having the school committee members introduce themselves.
I'm Maren Goldstein and the Finance Subcommittee Chair.
Hello, I'm Laurie Garcia. I'm on the Policy Subcommittee and I'm also involved with Wellness.
Hi, I'm Megan Harvey. I'm the Secretary and on the Finance Subcommittee and have some kids in the school system. Welcome.
I'm Shannon Dunham. I'm the chair of the Policy Committee.
Ben Hersey, Policy Subcommittee, and I also have some kids in the district as well.
Nicole Chappelle, the mayor.
And Cindy Kwasinski, the chair, and I'm also on the Finance Subcommittee. So our format has three parts. First, we invite you to make an opening statement. Then we have a series of questions that we will ask you. And we'll close by listening to any comments that you wish to make and allow you an opportunity to ask us questions. So if you'd like to give a brief statement, we're ready.
Terrific, thank you. Good evening, and it's an honor to be here tonight. I thank the school committee for having me. I also want to give a quick thank you to the school and central office staff and teachers, students, city officials who spent time out of their busy days today to meet with me and give me a window into the Easthampton Public Schools and the Easthampton community. So I am grateful for that. I'm here because I've been born and raised in the Pioneer Valley, and I've chosen to stay and live and raise my children in the valley. And I'm committed to that because the values that you find here are about strong education and quality communities. And that is something that I see reflected when I look at Easthampton and the Easthampton Public Schools. I see them in things like the Mass Audubon and the Easthampton's Education and Learning Foundation partnerships, the City Arts with the high school, and a variety of different opportunities taking place that connect the community with our schools. And when we see that, we know that we're building stronger schools and a stronger community when we work in partnership. And so I come to you as a education administrator who has 10 years of building leadership experience, 7 years as a middle school principal, and the last 10 years I've been a director of curriculum and instruction, which is quite all-encompassing beyond curriculum and instruction. And that has provided me with a lot of opportunity to learn the many functions of how a school district runs and the things we need to have in order to function well. And those experiences are coming from a small town community where as a leader, you do need to know those pieces, all of those pieces intimately. When you're in a city, it's really hard because there are people who kind of, I say, pull the levers for you. Working in a smaller community, you're the person working those levers, understanding the business finance, understanding what your homeless population needs, what your English language learners need. And so what I bring to you tonight is someone who I believe I see myself as an adaptive leader, someone who really has a depth of knowledge around business, finance, and procurement, as well as a leader who's progressive when we look at curriculum and instruction and supporting our subgroup populations, whether it's through special education, ESL, or any of our marginalized population student groups. As a leader, I also feel like I bring to you tonight that love of community. As I said before, my heart is with education, and education needs a strong community to support it to be successful. And in all of that, it's about relationships. We're building relationships to build a bigger, stronger community and stronger kids. And so I've been quite selective in my idea around superintendency. It's not just something as a stepping stone for me. I've taken a look at Easthampton, and I feel like the values reflect who I am, and so that's what I hope to bring and share with you tonight as we talk further and I answer more of your questions. But that is what brings me here tonight in hopes to potentially be a superintendent in the Easthampton Public Schools.
Thank you. Before we ask our first question, I want to announce something I forgot to announce. Easthampton Media is taping this, and we are also streaming this live. Jen is putting it on Facebook. So we're reaching out to as many people as we can. To Shannon.
Okay, what do you perceive as the superintendent's role in the community?
The superintendent's role in the community is multifaceted. The superintendent needs to understand the needs of the students that walk through the building doors each and every day. All of the students, not just the aggregate population. We need to know about the kids who are in need, the kids who are struggling. We also need to know about the students who need that extra, whether it's in advanced coursework, to push them to reach higher and to reach their potential. A superintendent needs to be a supportive leader. We need to be able to reach out to our assistant principals, our teacher leaders, our building principals, and be that mentor, that confidant, to be able to have conversations about what's happening and support them around decisions and also guide them around elements of that. A superintendent needs to really be a part of the whole finance piece. The community entrusts us with multi-million-dollar buildings, which here in Easthampton, so fortunate to have the beautiful buildings that we have, but also with how we expend those funds. It is a real important component for the superintendent to really know the budget, understand expenditures, and be able to attest to the community that we are maximizing every dollar that we spend to educate students to do the best work that we can do. The superintendent also, the role is one of a relationship builder, of reaching out to our other public service agencies, whether it's our fire department, our police department, as we prepare to make sure our schools are safe places for students. When we talk about incident command and safety and emergency planning, and having really good and quality relationships with those folks, so that if there is an event, or even if we're practicing a lockdown or an off-site drill, that we have those relationships, that we've built them, that we've had conversations, and we're together in our efforts to keep the school community safe and the community at large. And then the superintendent also needs to consider what growth looks like for the community. How are you the instructional leader that's thinking about the next thing that needs to happen, and to provide guidance as you hope to help a community start where they are and evolve into the next phase of their learning and the greatness that the district's looking to achieve. And so those are the many roles that the superintendent plays, but they're also a stakeholder to the community and the face of a community. And a superintendent needs to show that they operate with an ethic of care and are true to who they are and who they believe, so that as community members meet with the superintendent or any of our staff, that they feel that there's a quality rapport and relationship. And so those are the many facets that I see the superintendent needing to make sure they provide those functions for a district.
Thank you very much.
I have the next question for you. In what ways do you see yourself utilizing the bargaining process to promote equity with other districts in attracting and retaining staff? What pushback from the community or school committee would you anticipate, and how would you approach that situation?
Sure. So utilizing the bargaining process, I'm assuming we're talking about contract negotiations, CBAs, and so the first place that we really need to consider is where we currently are at. We need to look at Easthampton Public Schools, if I take a look at the Unit A contract and look at the Pioneer Valley, our staff salaries fall right about in the middle of surrounding communities. If we look statewide, we fall far shorter. Of course, you've got Metro Boston in there, right? And so the first place I would say in the bargaining process is to take a look at how competitive are we as a district around salary? Are we able to attract teachers to the district to be able to serve our students well? And so that is something that's important. And to promote equity in regards to who we hire, we need to do a better job than simply posting on School Spring. Education found this great online place to be able to host job postings, and in some ways we've kind of fallen into that niche. We need to broaden our scope, and now, especially post-COVID, we have the opportunity to do job fairs, to reach out to Westfield State University, University of Massachusetts, Mount Holyoke College, Elms, any of our surrounding colleges, to try to promote just, let's start with simply getting teachers, right? We know that there's a job scarcity and teacher retention is tough, but teacher retention in Easthampton is good. So we're in that vein, we're in a good place. But we also need to be able to figure out how do we get teachers in, and then reaching out to those different places to hopefully bring equity and diversity amongst our teaching staff. In regards to pushback from the community or school committee, what would I anticipate? I would anticipate, would expect pushback from the school committee and the community and City Hall if, as a superintendent, I brought forth with my team a budget that was not reasonable. That budget process really needs to be tight. One of the first things that I feel a superintendent needs to do when they walk into a new district to get to learn the district from a fiscal standpoint is to do what I call a budget scrubber, to go line by line and understand what those expenditures look like and really know where the funds are going, because ultimately I'm the responsible party to say that's how taxpayers' money has been spent. But then in doing so, you recognize places where there are shortfalls, and you also recognize opportunities where we can maybe appropriate our funds better. And so I would expect to do that. I would look to do that so that if I were to bring a budget to school committee or the community, I would be able to show you the diligence of how we went line by line and how we are spending each dollar, so that the community, City Hall, understands we are not wasting money. We're meeting the needs of our students and trying to ensure we have a strong public school.
So student achievement is at the core of public school system. We all know that there are many facets to student achievement, but in regards to student performance, how would you use student performance data to prioritize the use of resources, including money, facilities, and human capital?
Sure. Our job is to ensure that when students leave Easthampton Public Schools, that they are able to meet the demands of the world that is at their feet, the world that's out there for them to go forth and become the person that they hope to be. And so at the core of a public school, we need to think about student performance data and making sure that we are collecting valid data. We need to be able to measure from year to year, or pre and post during a school year, what student performance looks like. We all know that there's the MCAS assessment out there. That is just one metric of assessment. There are many other facets of assessment that we need to look at to determine what student growth and achievement is. Whether they are finals and midterms at a high school level, whether it's a reading assessment at the elementary level, we need to use that performance data to create a holistic picture of who the students are. And then then that data is what should drive how we prioritize the use of our funds. If we see that students at the elementary level, the data is not where it should be, that students are not reading at grade level at the percentage rate that we would like to see, then that likely would be a priority in a school improvement plan as well as the district improvement plan. Likewise, at the high school, if we find that English language arts scores are not where they are, then we need to take a look at that data, identify what's happening, and create a priority around supporting that. From a funding vantage point, it will look like potentially dollars and cents, right? Typically, that usually means if students aren't performing well, we need to take a look at the core curriculum. What is that core curriculum? There may be a need to purchase a core curriculum. We also need to look at teacher instruction. What supports do teachers need to be able to maximize their potential in reaching the needs of the diverse learners, particularly post-pandemic that they're seeing in their classrooms? So curriculum, professional development, and the human capital is the follow-up. Because you can do all of those things, and if we don't follow up as instructional leaders and support the teachers, we as humans just tend to regress to what is most comfortable. And so the human capital comes with leadership's following up and ensuring that the implementation process is happening.
Thank you.
Okay. Why are you seeking this superintendency? And how do you see your particular skill sets working effectively for Easthampton? And why do your skills match our needs?
So in my opening statement, I spoke a little bit about this, of why I am seeking superintendency. For me, I love the job that I have, but I have a desire to be a superintendent. I feel like I have gotten to the place where after 10 years as a central office administrator, that I have the skills to share with another district. And I have been particular, as you had heard me say, I'm looking for a community that is invested in education, a community that cares about students, that cares about what happens in the schools, and is supportive of that. And one where diversity, equity, and inclusion is part of who the community is comprised of. And so that is why I've identified Easthampton. I'm not kind of going border to border, if you will, as you would see with some superintendent candidates. They're applying to a variety of jobs. That's not me. What do I see as my particular skill sets? I feel like my 10 years in central office, I have had the opportunity to be the IT director. So fiber in the street, all the way to end users. We can talk about head-end switches. We can talk about Cat 5, Cat 6 cabling. I've had opportunities such as that as the director of curriculum. I've also had the opportunity to work with English language learners, of whom right now I have 160 and growing, who 40% of them are their first year in the country and newcomers and beginners with their language. I've had opportunity as grants manager, that's always been one of the roles as a director of curriculum instruction, to oversee, last year it was over $5.1 million in grants and assets for the district, between ESSER funding, entitlement grants, and other grants that my office has set out to garner to support the overall local budget. Transportation contracts. I oversee our homeless and foster care students, and so that is an obligation each district has to those students. So along with that comes busing and contract, as well as procurement. So those are just a few of the things that I've had the opportunity to take that really deep dive, and all of those pieces, all of those skills coalesce in, I believe, myself being a match to Easthampton. A population of 1,400 students, you need a superintendent. who knows all of those facets, who has had those experiences intimately, where when your family from Afghanistan is scared to send their child to school, that your superintendent will go and do a home visit, that they will reach out and make sure that a family is taken care of. That's what a 1,400 student school district does. And those are the experiences that I would bring to Easthampton and the skills.
Thank you.
Have you ever dealt with a problem in which opinions were polarized, something akin to a question of capital punishment, choice, fundamentalist beliefs, long-standing political bias, etc.? What did you do? How did you plan? And what did you learn?
Yes, certainly. Happens more often than we'd like to see happen, right? The immediate recollection that comes to my mind are, as a building principal with parents of differing vantage points, of a student who is marginalized and a student who has the upper hand in a circumstance. And one group not seeing how the role of the student provided them with more opportunity, they had more power, there was a power differential in the relationship, and unfortunately the student and the parent were not able to see that difference, between the relational difference. What did I do? So there were a few steps to that. First, I met with each family individually and with the students, but also we worked to talk about restorative practice in a way to help a social worker work with a student around, such behavior was not appropriate. So let's talk about restorative practices. What does this look like? The hope to educate, to decrease that polarization, and also the student who was marginalized to also speak to them about how, as a community, we will make sure we stand up for the student that may not feel that people are standing up for them, to reassure that. And in this particular case, a safety plan was put into place to make sure that I understand, we've shared information, we try to educate, but sometimes beliefs are beliefs at a core. And so at the very least, what has to happen through a safety plan in that circumstance was to say, these are the rules within the context of school, because this is how the school will run, and we will run with dignity, and we will ensure that every student is accepted and is treated fairly and equitably.
In many districts, including Easthampton, world languages is often among the first disciplines to be cut when budgets are tight and the educational focus is on standardized test scores. What are your thoughts regarding reinstating a middle school program and/or exploring a dual language program begun in the elementary levels?
So, world languages are critical. We know that they're part of the MCAS core. Our students are expected to have some graduation, credits at graduation to ensure they can get into a local state college. That is our number one obligation, to make sure that that world language opportunity exists for students. Without considering budgetary implications. So putting that aside, because there is a financial component to this. We absolutely should be looking at middle school world language. Absolutely. We need to prepare students to be able to attain and be multilingual if that is the direction that students are heading. There are many opportunities, job opportunities. I know it as someone who oversees ESL. The translation service business is one that would be a great opportunity for students who are multilingual. In regards to a dual language program, that's a bit different, right? So a dual language program, I would foresee us looking at an elementary, kindergarten, first grade level, and one-way dual language, because we would need to identify that language, and based on statistics that I've read, we don't have the two-way numbers of a particular language. So for instance, in a two-way language, you have to have about 50% of the population be native speaking, say Spanish. And so you'd look at a one-way dual language program, and that's a commitment for the district, because a dual language program speaks to 6 years, which Matt Saul and a lot of the language communities, that's the 6 years is kind of their earmark of when language acquisition begins to solidify and you're able to be conversant and literate in a language. That's kind of the expected. We all know that oftentimes it takes much longer than that. So middle school foreign language as a feeder to the high school to promote exposure, to promote the acquisition of the mass core requirements is something we should consider. The dual language piece, from a budgetary finance component, we would need to make take a look at that as well, because that is multi-year, and I would say you'd probably start with one grade and build out, and that would take fiscal planning, because you would be adding an English teacher and a teacher of the given language that's selected. So hopefully I've answered your question. But those are my thoughts. They do come with a financial price. And so as a district, we would need to look at what are our core values, what is our strategic plan, and where does programming like this fall within the district and the district improvement plan and the strategic planning, and how do we prioritize the finances to do things such as this?
What role do you see MCAS standardized testing playing in our school system? Is there any other standardized testing that you see as valuable, and how have you used it?
So the role of MCAS as a standardized test, it's a moment in time. It's a moment in time. It is important. It is, I would not say that it is important. It gives us a look back on how students performed in a given year in a given content area. What it provides educators is an opportunity to reflect on their practice, to see where standards were met, where standards were not met holistically, and to consider how they would refine their practice. MCAS around student performance and outcomes, from my vantage point, it is not the be-all, end-all. I do recognize students need to pass the MCAS to graduate, of course, but it doesn't define a student and a student's knowledge base. We need to have multiple forms of assessment, whether it is utilizing BAS scores or DIBEL scores at the elementary level, or if you look at, there's a bunch of different programs out there. There's Advantage Math, there's NWEA MAP, where you can do norm-based, evidence-based assessments for students at grade levels, and also get back feedback real time to inform instruction going forward. So there are other standardized consistent measures that I do see as valuable, and things such as AVMR and MAP, those are immediate where we can make changes, and they also help for us to then bring in and compare what the student classroom work look like. What does the internal assessment that is norm referenced? You definitely want to make sure it's norm referenced so that there's validity and reliability to the assessment. And what does MCAS look like? And there may be other assessments like the ACTFL or something like that that students are taking for other disciplines and domains. But there is definitely value to informing instruction and providing feedback for parents. Very important.
Thank you.
How would you spend your first 3 to 6 months as superintendent in Easthampton, and what would your initial priorities be?
How would I spend the first 3 months? Listening. Listening. And listening some more. The first 3 months, even the first year, I would be joining Easthampton. It's my job to understand Easthampton. What's the culture? What's the community? What do families feel they need from the educational system? What do teachers feel? What do administrators? What does the community need? Reaching out to people like our police and fire, DPW, making connections with people, understanding everyone's role and their part in the community and appreciating that, and simply building trust and relationships so that as things happen throughout the system, I understand what other people's roles are. I've provided opportunity to meet with someone, being the new person in town, and really taking stock in their feedback and and asking questions of what people's perceptions about the work that we do, what is it that we do well, what would people like us to improve upon. One of the takeaways that I have gathered from seeing many superintendents over my career is doing a school residency. And that's something that's very interesting to me. And a school residency is the opportunity for an incoming superintendent to spend a week in a school to really know the lay of the land. It's one thing for us to go in, pop in for half an hour, walk through the building, say hello, but when you spend an entire week from the start of the day to the end of the day, you really capture what it's like to be a student in that building, what it's like to be an educator in that building, what our administrators and our office staff and our custodial staff are facing. Because sometimes just a quick glimpse doesn't give you the whole picture. And it helps you to prioritize, wow, this teacher has it down. What a system, how efficient. Or what does dismissal look like? Is it efficient? Or, well, maybe there's some room for improvement. But without seeing it for yourself, we shouldn't judge, right? So that is also a part of what I would see myself doing if I were the superintendent of Easthampton Public Schools, is coming in, spending time, and again, building relationships in that process. All too often, if we don't spend enough time, people feel like they're not recognized, and when they're not recognized, they don't feel valued. So that's just kind of a nutshell of what I would like to do if given the opportunity.
I have a next question for you. Integrating anti-racist curriculum is more than a diversity day or a few lessons sprinkled in throughout the year. Have you ever completed a curriculum review and overhaul as it applies to anti-racism from pre-K through high school? Can you describe some of the successes and obstacles that you encountered in that overhaul?
So yes. So as a curriculum director, one of the obligations the district has every 6 years, there's something called the tier focus monitoring process. You might call it an audit. And part of that process, one of the major standards in that process, is to do a diversity, equity, and inclusion review. It's actually Civil Rights number 24. I know it well. And that expectation of that standard in that monitoring process expects that in every grade, for every textbook that is taught or every novel, that you go through, no matter if you've taught it for 10 years or you're looking to onboard it, that you go through a process and you look in that material for bias, for racism, for any other type of female-male relationship, all of these things are captured, and we as a district, we work with our teachers and our administrators to go through that process. We talk about what that looks like. And we have to sign off and attest to that to the state. Now, does that mean that everything has to be checked, like, no, this is not present for material to be utilized? No, because sometimes we have materials explicitly in the curriculum to be able to talk about racism, to talk about just culture warfares that happen out there. And that is part of why that book exists in our reading closet, for example. But when those books have content that we may perceive families being concerned about, I see it as our job to reach out to our families and talk to our families about the content that is in the materials and how we're addressing state mandated standards by utilizing the book or the textbook or whatever the material may be, to reach out and be transparent with families. This is the content, this is the information, and field their questions. What I find is when we have curriculum materials that have, I call it heavy conversation points, it works best when we inform people that they know what's coming, that they can share with us their thoughts and concerns, and then we can work to allay those concerns or address them within the context of our instructional practice. So describing, successes and obstacles I've encountered, as a 5th grade teacher who taught health education and puberty, I'd say that's one of those where my 5th grade students were in a middle school when I was a teacher, right? So again, very similar to the example that I just gave to you, the obstacle was parents feeling like, are you teaching too much to my 5th grader? And so the success of that was doing similar to what I just described, which was we'd have a parent night each quarter as students entered into the health curriculum, where we were talking about adolescent growth and development. And we'd share the videos, we'd share the materials, the instructional materials, and by the time the parents walked out, you just felt, the weight taken off of their shoulders and understanding what was being taught. So that would be my example of an opportunity for success and obstacles encountered.
Thank you.
How would you describe your leadership style? In what areas are you continuing to improve your leadership style, and what particular strengths do you believe you will bring to Easthampton?
So I see my leadership style being a blend, as a adaptive leader and as a systems thinker. So the adaptive leadership style for me, you would see come out in looking at and really thinking about what is best for students, and doing what the title says, which is adapting, thinking about how things over time have changed, what is it that we need to do differently, and working to make those changes in a reasonable way that isn't just a knee-jerk reaction. And really considering how we move forward to maintain currency. As a leader, I also see myself as a systems thinker, speaking of systems, as a systems thinker, because when we make decisions, whether it's about curriculum and instruction or about budget or about staffing, a leader also needs to think about the implication of that decision to the overall organization. If you're looking at cutting staffing, what does that mean for the health of an overall organization? What's the ripple effect? If we had middle school foreign language and we remove that from the curriculum at the middle school, there's a ripple effect there. We need to recognize that as a system. And does it allow the system to continue to be healthy and support students, or does it start wearing away at the overall health of the system? And so that's how I would describe my leadership style.
Thank you.
Okay. How do you judge the performance of the staff members who report to you? What characteristics do you see as distinguishing a better employee from one whose performance is simply average? And what can you do to try to make superior staff out of average performers?
So judging performance of staff members is something that, as administrators, it's part of what we do. It is something that, in order to ensure, again, the system is working well, that we should be providing regular feedback. I know for myself, I want feedback. I want to know how I can get better. And so I would hope that staff members that report to me would feel the same way. That feedback is about growth and meeting your potential. And if for some reason that feedback is something that seems out of reach for the person, then it's my obligation to first stop and figure out how can I support that person and provide them with the ability and the knowledge to be able to meet that goal before I judge whether they can or they cannot do that. But once you've identified, here's the skill set that we need, here's the training to understand and be able to do what's being asked, then that's a place where you start having conversations about quality of performance, right? And that is part of how you distinguish between a good employee to a better employee. But we also have to be cognizant about what the job description is, right? What are we asking people to do? What are they hired to do? Sometimes people are generous and people go above and beyond their role. And so that is also a frame of mind that we have to think about in determining a better employee from an average employee, because sometimes that better employee may look better because they're going above and beyond what their job description is. And sometimes, if we were talking with our union friends, they'd say they're going beyond the scope of the contract. So there is a balance there that you have to be aware of. But for those who are in the average range, again, I talked about, acknowledging it, talking with them about providing supports for increased performance. And what can you do to try to make superior staff out of average performers? Give them a challenge. When you see someone who is highly successful and is just doing an exemplary job at all of the tasks that fall under what they do, talk to them. Acknowledge what amazing work that they're doing and identify, can we add this? Is this something that is of interest to you? Is it in the scope of their work? But we do this with teachers. When we have teacher leaders, we see teachers shine in certain areas, whether it's running a student group or being a department chair. We tap those people for their superior credentials in that area and their desire to do great things.
Following a shouting match with fellow senior Sally Smith, Jane Jones asked her friend, a senior, Cynthia Brown, to beat up Sally for $25. Cynthia accepts the assignment and sucker punches Sally outside the cafeteria. Sally, blindsided, doesn't have time to respond before teachers separate them and secure the area. Sally emerges with a sore jaw, but otherwise without serious harm, but she is very upset. Her parents are called and they take her home for the day. Cynthia's parents are also called to school, where they and their daughter learn of a 5-day suspension for fighting. Mr. and Mrs. Smith, however, are outraged that this was allowed to happen, especially because they do not know why the assault took place. The principal has very poor relationship with the police, the chief of police, and fearing the bad publicity, explains to the Smith that he will investigate himself before going to the local authorities. When they hear nothing for 3 days, the Smiths file a criminal complaint with the local police. The local reporter is tipped off and finds the complaint on the police blotter. It is the lead story in the local weekly's next edition several days later. And that's where the school committee learns about it. Assess this situation.
All right, so let's unpack this. So, first of all, assault in a school is unacceptable. And that's what we have here. In addition to the exchange of funds, that's another component to it. As the building principal needs to work within the construct of their handbook and has the right to suspend in accordance with the handbook as it's outlined and follow that handbook. However, regardless of the principal's rapport with the police department, the principal has an obligation to let, is it Cynthia who got punched? Sally Smith, ask her friend. Sally. So Sally's the one who was punched in this altercation, right? Mm-hmm. So the principal has the obligation to say to Sally's family, the school's handbook is written as such. I have determined after an extensive investigation, looking at both sides, looking at cameras, whatever might provide information to the overall situation that transpired. Once this is the school consequence for the student's behavior, but Sally's parents need to also be informed that given that it is an assault is a criminal matter, that they have the right, it's not a necessity, they don't have to, but they have the right to go to the police department and file assault on the aggressor. The very next thing that the principal should do is to reach out to myself, the superintendent, and explain, or maybe they've already in the process been keeping me appraised of what's happening, of where things are at. The principal having informed the parents that they can go to the police department. As a building principal who's been down this road before, I've also asked the parents to inform me if they choose to intend to do that. But I have also followed up with the police department. And again, regardless of rapport with the police department, which we really should try to have a good rapport with them, would be to call and check in and let them know that there was an altercation at the school. We don't divulge student information, that's student record, but let them know that a parent was informed that if they so choose, they may come down and they may be speaking to someone so that there are no surprises. And to that end, making sure that particularly if this is going to be a hot case, sometimes there's regular altercations between students and families and seeing things don't rise to ink in the media, but this one looks like it's going to, and that's when I would definitely reach out to the chairperson of the school committee to make sure that they're informed. And depending on what's appropriate in decorum, reaching out to the mayor to make sure that folks are aware of this incident, because awareness allows us to make sure that the information that goes out to the public is accurate. I have been in circumstances that have had international media, and that media is not always accurate as to what has happened. And so it's important for us to inform those who need to know who speak out publicly on behalf of the school and the community to know what's transpired so that they can do their best to make sure that accuracy of the information shared with the public is as accurate as possible.
Thank you. So back to me. You've already mentioned your extensive role with IT in Ludlow, but how do you see Easthampton assessing our technology needs? And how would you go about looking at a technology plan for use and curriculum in grades K through 12 for our future? And who would you involve in that discussion?
So my technology experience was as a director of curriculum instruction in South Hadley. My current role, just to be fair. So in regards to assessing technology, obviously we have 2, by all accounts, new buildings. But I did speak with Justin today, and I had said, well, but the high school is at 10 years. And in IT world, usually 5 to 7 years is what we call end of life, where things start failing and replacement cycles have to happen. So in assessing the technology needs, obviously our head of IT is the person that I would start with to understand the scope of technology that we're working with within the context of a building. And then bringing in our building principals, some teacher reps to understand what the technology needs are for instruction. But how would you go about looking into a technology plan? It would be pulling together groups of people to talk about where technology is at, what has to happen, whether, again, it's in the classroom or if we're talking head-in switch, remote switches, if we're talking access points, that type of stuff. That would be kind of more for the technology department. It's not necessarily the wheelhouse of our classroom teachers, but making sure classroom teachers have projectors, laptops, FM systems if needed, those types of things. So a committee to look at that, and then out of that, there should be an outgrowth of a technology plan. What is the priority? And my experience around technology planning is typically the technology planning comes on a capital plan if we're talking any major investment. There are regular cycles of replacement that the technology department will always have. Chromebooks that get broken for our one-to-ones. But for a technology plan, you would likely be looking at a capital plan that says in year 1 and year 2, looking at replacing overhead short throw projectors, wireless access point, upgrading head-in switch, and coming up with dollar amounts so that we are bringing it to the committee, we're bringing it to the city to understand long-term what that improvement would be to sustain the type of technology we believe we need in the classroom. A plan is absolutely critical. Technology is not the place where you want it to get out from under you, so to speak. So looking at Mountain View, brand new school, but we already need to start thinking about where we get to end of life. And like there's so many things to think about. And then, I think involve people K2, building-based, as I had mentioned in a committee. Just making sure I answered your question in full, but I think I did.
Yes, you did. Thank you very much.
Can I ask a quick follow-up on that one about, am I allowed to do that? Mm-hmm. Okay, it's the chair. About the tech curriculum, not just what tech they're using in the school, but what they're learning about how to interact. What goes into thinking about a tech curriculum?
So that's a bit of a pivot, right? So around tech curriculum, we need to take a look at instructional time on learning, right? Where does instructional technology come into play? Is it at the elementary level in an arts rotation where students are taught about basic keystroke functions, Google search, being SEPA and COPA compliant, and making sure we're talking to kids about internet safety, their electronic footprint, all of that. it's on both lines, right? We need the technology director to be there to talk about what we have for capacity to provide instruction to students, and when we're providing instruction, we're going to then be looking for them to utilize that equipment. So that has a direct impact on the technology department and what additional things they may have to maintain. But from an instructional standpoint, we need to take a look at what is the technology providing to the students that can only be provided through technology. And I think in the future, we are going to start seeing greater conversations around this. So you can walk into different classrooms and you can see amazing things happening with the use of technology and really utilizing technology and search engines to look up facts and contribute to conversations. You can also walk into a classroom and see students using a Chromebook as if it was a piece of paper, just typing their answers. Or my favorite is a student taking a graphing problem in mathematics, transferring the graphing problem to paper, calculating it out, and then going back into the computer to punch in the answers. So technology instruction and how that instruction is delivered and the intentionality behind the instruction would be critical in developing a program like that. Thank you.
As you know, issues of diversity, equity, and inclusion can be interpreted in many ways, from racial, gender, religious diversity to neurodiversity and special education, to issues of socioeconomic diversity and class. What are your overarching thoughts about these classifications, and how would you work to ensure that none of these important populations are lost in the shuffle?
This comes back to making sure that we start the diversity, equity, inclusion, and belonging conversations with staff. We need to train up, as I say. We are, as educators, we need to understand the meaning of diversity, and that it's not simply about race. It's about race and other things like neurodiversity, like socioeconomics. And what is equity? Equity isn't always equal, and making sure that as educators we understand that. And inclusion and belonging, making sure that we are looking at how we provide instruction, how we communicate with families, that we're inclusive with families who maybe don't speak English, inclusion of students who may have a different learning style. We need to understand that first. Once as educators we understand that, we are then able to transfer that information to the work that we do. Before we understand the meaning and understand where we fit in and creating equity for students, if we don't understand it, we can't do it. So first, teacher understanding, and then modeling for students. We need to model the behavior that we expect from students. And that sounds a little bit cliche because we say that with a lot of things. But if you really expect students to be good humanitarians and treat everyone with kindness, integrity, and of equality, then we have to show that to them as well. And then once we get to that place where we understand, we are modeling, and then we can get to the place where we are providing instruction and infusing the idea of equity and inclusivity and belonging into what we do in our daily work. Whether we're reading a piece of literature, or we're looking at mathematics, or we're looking at science, we need to be thinking about how that gets embedded in what we do. Because when we embed these concepts into what we do, first, we don't make it something that, oh, you need to learn this and just know this. We embed it into what we do because it's part of who we want our student citizenry of Easthampton to be. We want it to be the fabric of our school. We want it to be the fabric of our community and the people who reside here. And so embedding that in our instruction, and again, ensuring that if we're looking at students who have a neurodiversity and special education needs, how do we maximize the inclusion of those students in all of the opportunities that we can? We want students to be able to be as independent as possible and engage as much as they can in opportunities to stretch and grow. From race and gender and religious diversity, again, understanding comes first. We need to first understand before we can do. And how would you work to ensure that none of these students of the population were lost in the shuffle? It would be through modeling and practice. And there will be times, we are human, where we may not do things perfectly. But the goal is to continue to get better and make sure that we get to that place over time where we are fully inclusive.
Thank you.
Tell us about a time when you had to address a crisis that posed serious consequences for your district. What was the crisis and how did you or your colleagues deal with the situation?
So we had, I guess, I'm trying to think of, does it qualify as a crisis? A few years back, we had lost two very young children to a tragic car accident. And the superintendent was at a conference, and so that left myself in charge of supporting our administrative team in this crisis. It was a community crisis. Grandparent worked for the system. The children went to school in the system. And it was a crisis all around. And when crises happen like this, the actions of a school district can make or break the public perception of who you are as a district. In this case, we came together all weekend long, shedding tears, of course, through the process, but looking at the steps of how we bring people into school on Monday morning. How do we? And mapping out what needed to be done, who we needed to speak with, reaching out to classroom teachers of the children, consulting with counselors about what does the classroom of the children look like. Do we respect and leave the desk there? Do we remove the desk? How do we do this in the most sensitive way? Coming up with scripts for our staff so that they know what to say, because many of them were shedding tears, and it's a difficult situation, and sometimes you feel like you're at a loss to support people and say, this is hard, this is beyond imaginable, but if you just take these few sentences and read them to the class, then you'll have done what you needed to do. And particularly for students who may not have known the children who had perished, this day should go on as normal. We know that for students, we have to try to get them back to normalcy in times of crises, right? And so really stepping out phases of how you will mitigate the crisis, who you need to touch base with, talking with police and fire as well, because they were on scene, and the support, whether they needed the support or the support that they could provide us based on information they knew would eventually, through the old game of telephone, come our way, and that may also rattle people to their core of hearing some of the things that happen. So what resulted of that was, out of a great tragedy and great crisis, was a sense of calm during a very difficult week because people knew what to expect, people were supported, and we didn't leave any stone unturned to make sure that systems were in place to respect the family as well. The little things of like, don't send a late bus notice home to a parent. Taking care of those things in a crisis, being planful, thoughtful, deliberate, reaching out to all the people that are involved and ensuring that you follow that plan through creates calm after the crisis. Without doing something like that, the crisis just grows. The anxiety grows, the fear grows, and that's really important during a crisis time, is that you have to kind of maintain, as hard as it is, and be planful and supportive.
Thank you very much.
I'm going to pivot a little bit to special education. Special education is a particular challenge because of the complexity of the rules, service needs, and student and parent concerns. How do you assess the effectiveness of your special education programs? What have you done to try to make your special education department work better? So the first part, special education is complex. And the first place that we need to begin is to really understand whether I'm the special education teacher, the special education team leader, the liaison, or administrator. We need to know the rules. We need to know what the service provisions are. We need to know and understand what our recommendations really mean, and to make sure that we are recommending proper services and not just services to mitigate a concern if there's not evidence to show that the need is there, right? So it is a challenge, and so supporting staff in what are the rules, what are the regulations, what are your timelines, what are the parameters around servicing needs, as well as student and parent concerns, making sure that the parent compliance packet is shared with them, and if parents have concerns. That's the first place to really start to break down the complexity of special education. How do you assess the effectiveness of your special education programs? I'd say your students. So when you look at a particular program, if it's an LLD program or an autism program, and we have service providers, whether it's ABA support, whether it's intensive reading instruction support, we need to monitor the impact of the instruction for the students. Are the students being serviced and their needs being met based on the curriculum and service provisions that are in there? And what growth are students making? That to me shows program effectiveness. There are times when specialized programs, and it happens oftentimes in smaller districts, where because the numbers aren't so great, specialized programs, subset programs can become muddy. We have best of intentions, but we really have to, in those programs, have very clearly defined criteria of who meets the criteria for entry into those programs, and where possible, what's the goal for the student to exit the program and gain greater independence and be in a least restrictive environment. And so student performance, student outcomes are part of that, and also assessing the program that you're using. Is the program really meeting the needs of the students that are identified in that particular classroom? Have I done and tried to make what I've done to make special education work better? I have never been a director of special education, so I cannot attest to having, changed a particular program. But as a director of curriculum instruction who works very hand in hand with
Tier 1 and Tier 2 and Tier 3 instruction, our Tier 3 students who are receiving maximum general education support are those students who, if we are not successful with them, they end up in the evaluation queue for special education. And so I'll use that as an example of around Title III students, Tier 3 students who are funded under Title I, oftentimes, and programs of putting into place very explicit Wilson reading, Wilson foundations, Wilson just words, looking at Orton Gillingham, which is on the which Wilson is founded on, but it's a much more one-to-one explicit reading programming instruction. And so that is what I have done at a general education level, to look at very explicit instruction that's research and evidence-based to support Tier 3 students in an effort to not have them be in a situation where they'd be referred to special education. And that I feel like that could translate into special education as looking at programs' success and efficacy, and how you would improve a special education program.
Thank you.
Shifting again, when you prepare a budget for the school committee, how do you go about this, and what happens before the proposal reaches the committee?
So preparation for a budget. So the place where I would start is run our reports out of, I'm used to Munis. I believe we use VP. There's a different system here in BPS? KVS, sorry. Got those acronyms wrong. But so a different system, but we would need to run a report and take a look at each site. And what I would ask of my principals and my head of schools is to go through those budget line items, item by item, and look at their expenditures and identify what was their allocation this past year, what have their expenditures been in the year so far, what are your projected expenditures for the end of the year that you know. For instance, if I were to do that with my own budget under McKinney-Vento for our homeless students, I can project out my potential transportation costs, though I don't have them, right? So by year's end, what kind of, what expenditures are you looking at? And then having done that, take a look at what are extras. Are there extras in the budget? Are there places where you're so lean that you're going to need to transfer money from all different places to be able to pay the transportation costs, for instance? And identify where funding needs to be placed, make sure funding is in the right place, and also have backup for that, particularly if we're purchasing materials and goods. What is the cost? What's the cost with the shipping and handling, right? All of those really fine details. That is the first 2 or 3 runs that I would walk through with my administrative team around, again, kind of doing a budget scrub of looking at what we have, where we're going, and then thinking about, so now next year, what does enrollment look like? Is enrollment up or down? Does that influence your materials? Does it influence your staffing pattern? If we have an incoming second grade that is 30 kids less than the outgoing second grade, that's something that I would expect an administrator would bring as part of their assessment of their budget. And then we would talk that through. And what is reasonable? What are needs? There's needs and there's wants. And sometimes, depending on what the fiscal climate is, you have to stick with the wants. The next phase of that is to also look back at the strategic plan, the district plan, the school improvement plan, which all should align vertically as to the expenditures focusing on the things that we said that we were going to do, the things that we have identified as priorities to move the district forward. Because you can't set priorities, say you're going to move the district forward in a particular area and not think about the funding that's attached to that, and make sure that that's all encompassed of what meeting those goals would look like. And then what I'd like to do, what I would foresee doing is then bringing a draft to the committee for initial review, to share where we're at, what the percentage we're looking at, what our needs are, to get feedback. I believe in an open conversation around budget. I would want to know from the committee what your expectations are, what your targets are, from Mayor LaChapelle as well, from the city end, where they're looking for us to come in at. In the end, the budget that's finalized is the budget that I need to figure out how to make work with my staff. That's the end result. What my job is also to do is to provide a compelling story as to if Easthampton Public Schools gets a 3%, this is what education in the Easthampton Public Schools will look like. If the Easthampton Public Schools gets 5%, this is what it will look like. So that the community is aware of what the difference in funding will look like and the services that students will or will not gain by the type of funding that's allotted. And then from there, it's kind of that back and forth where we try to massage it and make it work and maximize the funds that are used. And then I would feel content with putting forward a budget for review and approval.
Thank you. So what is the most important decision you've made in the last year or two? How did you go about developing your decision or course of action? And what alternatives did you consider?
So I would say an important decision that was made as of recent is around our English language programming. So in the past few years, we've had an exponential growth of students. Just 3 years ago, we were under 100, and now we're at 169. And so with that, there were some really important decisions to be made around programming. When I had arrived in Ludlow, there were 38 students who were else. And we had 5 schools, and so you sprinkled them around the schools, and you could easily support a small number of students in a certain way. But during the pandemic and post, the numbers of students that we have welcomed into our community has risen exponentially, not allowing us to kind of do the old one-room schoolhouse, we can take you in and support you type of way. We had larger numbers of students that needed greater support, particularly newcomers who had no English, and some students who were SLIFE, meaning they've had interrupted or limited education, and particularly at the secondary level, that has great influence around course and course of studies and what we're able to offer. And so the decision that was made was working with my high school principal and saying, we have 15 students, all of whom are newcomers. We have a very traditional track around ESL. We need ESL mathematics. We need ESL civics. We need to meet the students where they're at and bring them to where they can grow. And it's an important decision because the students that I'm speaking of were a month away from graduating. They were off to university. And to come to the United States and have to think about years of work to reach something that was within reach before they left was really hard. And so we went about developing this it was hard. The state actually came to us and said, so how did you do that? I said, well, a lot of work. So we started talking with other districts. What are you doing? How are you doing it? A lot of folks were not doing it, or they were such big cities like West Springfield and Agawam, where they had a large enough population to have just whole programs that a community like Ludlow was not able to do. Well, it's kind of like too small, not too small, but not too big. We're kind of stuck there, like a tween in the middle. And so we began going about developing our programming, tapping into our social studies department, tapping into our math department chair, bringing on board my middle school math department chair, and identifying curriculum for the students to essentially create a civics course and a mathematics course to meet the students where they were at. There was a lot of conversation because adding a course of studies in the middle of October is not exactly what your high school principal wants you to be asking of them, as well as changing the trajectory of credits and thinking about how all that plays out. What alternates did you consider? We considered reaching out to Lower Pioneer Valley Collaborative and asking, is there a need amongst member districts to have a newcomer program where students from Ludlow, West Springfield, Agawam, Easthampton, if there was a need where they could coalesce and we could collectively come together and provide such services. Because truthfully, at our district level, at our high school, we were moving courses around, and so that was one of the alternatives that we had considered. We didn't have a lot of alternatives, and so we elected to stay in-house. But that's a really important decision because we've changed the course of studies. We've brought in different curriculum. We have had to consult with different members that are not part of, say, the high school staff. We had to reach down to other grade levels and ask for their expertise to support us. And so they went above and beyond in helping us to develop and support the student needs.
The mayor had to step away, and so we're going to hold that question till later. And if the mayor isn't able to return at that time, I'll read the last question.
Okay. So should I go next?
So go ahead, Lori.
Okay. Please tell us about your experience working in the curriculum area that might include identifying a need to revise curriculum, implementing a new curriculum, or assessing the curricula that is already in place. What did you learn from these experiences, and how would you use what you have learned?
So this is my wheelhouse, right? So around curriculum, identifying needs of a particular curriculum first comes back to data. We need to look at student data, student performance. In some cases, you may find that the data shows that a larger number of students are not reading at grade level. That would be an identifier that there may be a core curricular content need that you would want to go in and take a further look at what's the current program, what's the current instructional practice, and what's happening that's resulting in higher than appropriate students not reading at grade level. So data is paramount to supporting the why. We don't want to make changes without having the why, because that would make myself even uneasy. Folks need to know why. So the data provides that why. And implementing new curriculum. So kind of a carryover of that is, at one point we had said our students aren't making the gains in reading and early literacy as we expect them to. And so the first part was to take a look at the core curriculum. At that point, there wasn't a core curriculum. We were a literacy collaborative model, which is a model. It's not a program. And so anybody who comes in and isn't trained in the model, absent a lot of self-study, is not necessarily going to have the fidelity of implementation. And so we moved to looking at our core curriculum, identifying evidence-based programs through things such as Curate and Ed Reports to figure out what programs show that they make a difference. Utilizing that construct, we looked at the options that we had, and teachers, administrators, parents, community members came around the table. We vetted the materials. Teachers elected to pilot for an amount of time the actual program to see, is it the right fit for us? We came back to the table and talked about what those options were, the pros and the cons. Again, there is no perfect program out there, but it's important to have consistency in instruction. And so after piloting, we reached the place where a decision had to be made, and we identified the pros and the cons and the best fit for the district. Now, I will tell you in all candor that the best curriculum that they liked the most was out of our price range. It was $100,000 per teacher. We simply couldn't do that. As much as I would have loved to have been able to provide that to my teachers, it was just something we could not fiscally do. And so we went to our second choice because of that, and began the implementation process. And that was right before COVID. And so we are now kind of retooling and resetting around the fidelity of implementation, and we are beginning the assessment practice around the effectiveness of the program and the fidelity of instruction. So also assessing curricula that's already in place. Sometimes, so I just gave an example of new curriculum where there was an absence of curriculum. But the question also asks here about assessing current curriculum that's already in place. And sometimes we can make do with some things that we have. There may be modifications that we need to make, supplementary materials as a result of maybe standards have been updated and improved, and provide supplemental materials. And the program may be completely viable and good to continue to move forward. Or it may be something where you have to revisit, look at the data, and start over and do a similar process that I just described around reading. What did you learn from these experiences? That it's a process. You're not turning something around in a month or two. We need to involve stakeholders, teachers, parents, administrators. They need input. They need to buy in. They need to understand the why of why we're onboarding a new program. And one of the and I felt that it was highly successful and overall went very well. But one of my takeaways, and this was in an effort to just be, it was in an effort to just kind of be helpful, I guess, was we asked for data input through a Google form, and there was a lot of the same commentaries. And as opposed to providing 90 pages, I took the commentaries and I rendered them down. And that was not met well, because what was concerned was that maybe I had vetted out information. And so that is a learning that took place in an excellent process that I felt went really well. That was a learning that I need to next time realize, give them the 96 pages, and then if they ask you, Erica, to vet it for them and render it down, then do that for them, because they were so invested, they wanted to see all of those. And so those were my learnings.
How have you built lines of communication with the various district stakeholders, such as your leadership team, the faculty, community leaders, business interests, and families.
So building lines of communication, it's really about being present. You need to engage the communities and the stakeholders, and you need to be present for your leadership team. You need to meet with them. We need to talk with them. We need to be there as a confidant, as a mentor, and really support them. Same with faculty. Faculty needs to know that they're heard. You need to be present for them to feel like they know you, to be able to stop you in the hallway and say, hey, Erica, I've been thinking about, or I'm worried about. Being present is important to be able to make those connections and keep the lines of communication open with faculty. Community stakeholders and business interests, it is, again, about being present, about being out in the community for other events, whether they're co-sponsored with the school or they're just like the Winter Festival that happens in town, or if the police and fire put on an event. To be present as part of the community, to build those relationships with folks so that communication happens with greater ease. We know that when we make connections with people, it's that much easier to be able to pick up the phone or stop on by and say, I have a concern, or I'm worried about something, or could you help me with something, when we have made connections prior to. And so the way that I like to do that is, again, being present, participating, being at student events, being out at community events, and also engaging stakeholders and community members in things that we are doing in the schools, right? So one thing that I'm very proud of that I've done in a past position is district-wide safety plan, from regular fire drills to full off-site evacuations and reunification, and spent a lot of time with police and fire and doing tabletop drills and things like that with them. And what that afforded me is a great opportunity to build relationships and build trust, so that anytime that there was an issue within a building, we could talk it out and we were there. We were able to meet with success. And so that is how I believe, that's my belief, is being present, participate, and make connections with people.
Mary, you're just in time for your question.
There you go. Timing, huh?
We waited for you.
Okay. Tell us about your experience working with children and families who don't look like you or speak the language you do, or who don't have the economic advantages you do. How have these experiences shaped your view of public education and its mission?
So you're tugging at my heartstrings on this one. You've heard me speak as the ESL coordinator in my current district. The experiences that role has provided me has reshaped my thinking as an educator and how I communicate with families. If I could, I'd allow every administrator to walk in that role for a moment in time. Because working with my ESL families, they're the folks that are described in this question. They're families that don't look like me. They're families who have different traditions than I do. And sometimes it's really hard for us to communicate. But when you take the time, and so many societies are not like the American society. Many of our cultures want us to take time and take pause, and the relationship, the conversation matters. I find with some of my families, I will spend 2 hours and we'll talk about all kinds of things. And then right before I leave, it's an entry point for them to ask me the question that they had so long to ask me. And that's a cultural realization that you have when you work deeply and closely with families. that allows you to support families and think about how we help to bring them into our community. How do we help continue to, how do we, oftentimes what happens for folks in these situations, if they don't look like us, they don't speak like us, they're not feeling as though they are fully engaged in our community. And so by spending time with families and understanding what those needs are, it helps us to remove barriers. And we remove barriers by understanding some of the things that I just shared with you, but then taking that back to our staff and sharing it with our staff. It's been the Persian New Year and Ramadan has started. So one of the communications I've had to my staff is recognizing MCAS is underway, cross-country running has started, and some of our kids who are observing are fasting. And so these experiences help you to then transfer that information over to shaping the views of our community and shaping the views of how teachers perceive the students that walk through their classroom door. And as a public educator, it's powerful. It's powerful to see that by simply taking the time, they entrust their children with you. We had an experience where one of our students' buses didn't show up, and I had to go to the home because they had just come from Afghanistan, and the mother was in tears, saying, "In my country, if my child doesn't come home from school, they are dead." So this strikes a chord with me, and understanding the students who have needs and are economically disadvantaged students, taking the time to meet them. Sometimes it's meeting them at their home, stopping by and seeing, what can I do for you? Because sometimes coming into school is also a fear, because they already feel judged just walking into your office. And so I've had many of these experiences, and meeting people with where they're at, keeping your mind open, taking the time, and it's hard, we're busy, but taking the time to understand where people are coming from, to understand people's needs, and to be compassionate. Because we have to recognize that, while we all feel like sometimes there's a lot of woes in our own life, when you sit down to speak to some of these families, it really puts what you see as woes into perspective. So from a public education standpoint, I'm a fierce advocate of my students. Some might claim a little too fierce, as I cite civil rights laws to make sure that we provide equal access and equal opportunity and remind people of what our obligations are. But it has made me a fierce advocate of these children.
Thank you. So this completes our questions for you. You're welcome to ask any questions you may have of us and to make a closing statement.
So one of my first questions that I have is around what if Easthampton were to select me as superintendent, what would make the selection of me exceed your how can I exceed your expectations if selected as superintendent?
Does anybody want to go first?
I would just say it would exceed my expectations if you did 80% of what you told us tonight. I'd be thrilled.
I'll go. This is a community, I think that you pointed out, that cares really deeply about the school. The parents in this community are really invested. They're, some who are here, and then there's a whole bunch of them who have coordinated. This is not from us, this is them coordinating with each other to make sure that there are ways that they can be watching these interviews at home. This community really cares about the school. So for me, I would really love to see the community feeling like they are a part of what's going on here. And we're in this transition point, not so much with the high school. The high school has been here 10 years, but we just moved this year to a new K through 8 from three neighborhood schools plus a middle school. And the community aspect is just in flux. And so how do we bring the parents in who want to be in and help them feel heard? How do we recreate those neighborhood feels? I think that feeling and connection is the part that for me would just make me feel like the new superintendent is exceeding expectations.
That's a good one. That's a heavy lift.
I feel that communication is of utmost importance. Communication with the community, with the parents, as Megan said, but also communication with us as the school committee. Because if we don't feel that we have that exchange and we don't feel comfortable that we can bring up certain topics and we're going to listen to each other with respect and with openness and with a dialogue that can continue late at night or on the weekends if necessary, then I feel that the communication isn't there. So it needs to be there even if it's not during the workday.
I think I'd echo my colleagues here, but I think to exceed expectations, I would love to see you be willing to connect with everyone in the district, all the stakeholders, and specifically parents. As a parent in the district, that's been a big issue for me, and I know parents can be difficult and they can demand a lot, things that go against the rules and regulations, etc. But being willing to listen to what parents have to say is a huge deal, and we need much more of that. I think also students too. I want someone who's able to recognize that students are part of the community, not just objects that we do things to.
Right.
So how will you find ways to listen to them and bring them into the conversation is big.
And to build on that a little, we still have families who feel intimidated and feel as though they don't have the voice that they'd like. And so I would really like for our next superintendent to do as much as possible to reach out to families, to make it so that they feel as though they have a voice and they feel welcome to come in instead of being hesitant and feeling a little bit shut out. We're really working with this, and I think there's so much more that we can do. So that would be my hope and expectation. I'd like to see everybody feel comfortable, everybody be able to come in and feel like they could talk to you. You might be busy.
Yes, if I do it right, I would be. But that's okay. That's okay. I'm a parent of 2 school-age children. One's in 1st grade, one's in 6th grade. So I live on the other side as well. And that communication is really important. It puts me in check sometimes about my own practices. The other question that I had was, what traditions make Easthampton a special place? And what are traditions that you would like to see maintained in the community?
Anybody want to go first?
I mean, my first thought is that there's maybe a lack of traditions, and I'd love to hear different thoughts on that. But I would love to see some traditions sort of like cultivated. And that for me, I'm a big arts person. Things related to the arts would be really valuable. Family engagement related events would be great. Holidays, celebrations, that kind of thing, that go beyond just the school buildings, perhaps. Ways to invite the community into the buildings would be really great as well. And ways to foster parent connection. So it's not really tradition, maybe I'm just looking for like new approaches, but I'd love to hear the traditions that you all come up with or speak about.
I think that Easthampton searches for traditions, and so we all like to be called members of Whoville, even though there's no facts to back that up. But I'm just bringing that up because we actually have a Whoville celebration, and the community really loves that and brings music to the event, and that is a growing tradition that.
It has been, yeah.
Yes,
It has been, yeah.
And Winterfest.
Yep.
Like, the community has tried to create these things to be more encompassing of, I don't know, celebrations that aren't just religious based, I guess we should say.
Sure.
And I don't know, but I've been here for 29 years, and those are the only two things that really stand out as a community type celebration. In the summer, cultural chaos.
Yep.
That
Yes.
also
Yeah.
is becoming
Yes,
very
that sounds like a
big.
blast.
And that involves the arts, as
Yeah,
Ben
the
said.
arts night out, the arts walk.
And
that's a
arts
big one
walk,
too.
very important.
Very valuable.
Growing,
Yeah. Yep.
the growing arts community.
That's huge.
I mean, I think that when everyone was mentioning the traditions and searching, I agree. As we were naming it though, I think it's Easthampton doesn't want to let go. I don't want to see the tradition and art in everyday life and celebration. So, Jubilation, Winterfest, Cultural Chaos, Arts Walk, the movies in the park, Fall Festival, whatnot. Millside all has something to do with some arts outlet, and I think that comes from the intention of years ago when Easthampton as a government included an arts coordinator in planning, so our planning department, and it has its own 50c3 board, Easthampton City Arts. Yeah. And I'm just kind of connecting this now, but the thirst for having arts and culture at all level of access, anywhere and everywhere you go in Easthampton, is something almost everyone agrees on. Like cultural chaos, there's something for everybody, or there's something for people to look at from across the pond as it happens. So, the arts kind of bring us together.
The other thing I would add to that, I'm sorry, Mary, you've been trying to, you go. No, go ahead.
I think the place for me where this question goes, though, especially when you're asking about what do we want to maintain, this makes me think about our different elementary schools. So we had very strong, Maple School traditions. We had strong, that was like end of the year, there was big song and celebration and videotaping of it. And that meant a lot to those students and to the parents, and it was just a really strong tradition there. Same thing at Center in Pepin. I'm going to get it wrong. There was a World Cultural Festival where we did food and celebration and all kinds of those pieces that were sort of brought out, games and things for kids. And I think that now that we've integrated into a single school, we need to sort of look back at how do we want to bring those forward into our school and sort of expand that beyond. We talked a little bit earlier about helping parents, helping teachers realize, move beyond being a Maple parent or a Central Pepin parent. Like, how do we sort of integrate into this new school but not lose those traditions that we had that made us really strong? So that's something that I think that we need to continue to look at and work on.
Yeah, where Marin went is exactly where I was going to go.
Me too.
I think we all have the same mind.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's hard. We have three, they were wonderful elementary schools and a great middle school all coming together, all with their different styles and their different traditions. And it would be nice to see us begin to build new traditions.
That
that are
bring each
part
of those
this-
communities together as
Yeah.
one,
Yeah.
as Mountain View.
So this is my opportunity to say that we do have the Manhattan Rail Trail, and we are working on ways to get people to do things. So we do the walk, bike, and roll with Mass Safe Routes to Schools. And last winter, even in the pandemic, it was the first winter walk, and I've helped to organize 7 events now, and Jean Libby is our parent coordinator, and she's also begun to help us create this tradition. The students love it, whereas before we opened up Mountain View, it was really complicated because we would have the students go to the middle school, and then we had the other students going to all the different elementary schools. So now we're working on ways to get everybody to go to the new school, which can be problematic for the little ones. So we have one of the teachers who's helping us, Scott Kavanaugh. You probably met him because he was the head of the search committee. He's also working with this Safe Routes to School. And we have a new place for the little ones to meet at the park so they can go through the woods, and then we're working with our city planner to help. We actually got a grant from Safe Routes to Schools to help the infrastructure of the trail. So
I saw your video. It was great.
Yeah, so that's an exciting new tradition that we're building.
Excellent. Good to get the kids out and moving too.
Yes.
Right, so I think that's what I have for questions. And from a closing statement, essentially I just want to say thank you. School committee, Easthampton Public Schools, Easthampton community at large, people have just welcomed me today and just so gracious and generous, and I am appreciative of that. And it's what I had expected and hoped to see, a thriving community, growing, and just grounded in that caring community that is so central to who I feel I am as a person. And at the heart of every caring community is your schools and your children, the parents' most prized possessions, right? The people that are most important to them. And so I appreciate the ability to kind of add to my knowledge base and understand more, and also the opportunity to share with you my skill and my passion for education, and what I could potentially bring to the Easthampton Public Schools if I were selected to be your next superintendent. You've heard me say I've got 10 years of central office experience. I've had the time to really hone my skills in many, many different areas that I feel from a skill set vantage point would be a great asset to bring to Easthampton. And for me, in my career, I feel like I'm ready for that next step. I want to take that next step, but I want it to be in the right place, the place that we together have a fit. And so I guess I leave you with a final thought around just who, if selected, I would hope to bring to you as a superintendent. And being a superintendent who would bring to the Easthampton students the fact that they're students first. I'm a students first leader. If we can't answer a question and say that at the root of what we're doing is about students, then we need to rethink our actions, right? I'd like to be a superintendent for Easthampton who really looks to remove barriers for our teachers. We need to support them, we need to listen, and we need to work together with them as they persevere, coming out of COVID, resetting, and supporting our students and growing in ways that we haven't, in ways that are challenging us, right? That ways we haven't seen before. Kind of the new frontier of what education is going to look like post-COVID. As a superintendent, I would look to our administrative team. They're strong folks. I've had the luxury of working with some of them hand in hand in a past professional life. They're smart people. And I also know, having been in the roles, that as smart as and amazing as some folks are, they also need a leader there for them, to be a confidant, to be a mentor, to be someone to sit down and sound ideas off of so that they can be their best self. And lastly, for our families, I'd like to be a superintendent who families understand they can come to me and share their concerns and know that I'm there to listen and their kids come first. It's very important. If families don't feel like their kids come first and aren't your number one priority, that's a sad day for a parent. And I would hope that I'd be able to bring that to your families as well. And so for me, truthfully, Easthampton's not a stepping stone. It's not a place where I want to come and get experience and then move on. It's a place where I would look to spend the next 10 plus years serving the community and the students, if given the opportunity. And so with that said, I thank you for your time. I look forward to hearing from the committee as you make the difficult decision as to who amongst the candidates would be the best fit for you. But I thank you for your time.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you very much.
So do we have a motion to close this interview?
Yes, that's a tradition for me to make a motion. So I would like to make a motion to end the second interview this evening.
I'll second.
Per tradition. It's like assigned seats, right?
Okay, Lori?
Laurie Garcia, aye. Buenas noches.
Buenas noches, señora. Megan Harvey, aye. Good night.
Shannon Dunham, good night. Thank you.
Ben Hersey, good night.
Mary Nicole Ashwell, good night.
Cindy Kwasinski, good night, and thank you very much.
Appreciate it.